Welcome to my channel Techify with Adil. So today in this video we will be seeing about Microsoft Entra Domain Services. So this will be an examining session. So line of business applications are generally deployed on computers and devices that are domain members. Okay, firstly, what is line of business applications? So line of business applications are specialized software solutions designed to meet the specific needs of a business unit or department. So usually our companies like say example we have a logistic department. So logistic departments, they will have a special customized software maybe to manage their logistics, or to have their receipts or their orders or all those stuffs. They may have some customized design softwares for the particular department or units business needs. So these are called as line of business applications. So these applications support critical operations and help organizations to run in day-to-day activities efficiently. So some of the known major common applications we can say like SAP ERP, then Microsoft Dynamics 365, then CRM, Microsoft 365 CRM, and so on. So all this or can be considered as a line of business applications, and some companies will have their own customized applications as well, designed by their own internal team or by their vendor. So they deployed in their own devices or domain members to for their usage day-to-day activities. So these organizations use ADDS based credentials for authentication and group policies to manage them. So when you consider moving these applications to run in Azure, one key issue is how to provide authentication services to these applications, because their credential base is all on ADDS. So to satisfy this need, you can choose to implement a site-to-site VPN between your local infrastructure and Azure IS, that is infrastructure as a service, or you can deploy replica domain controllers from your local ADDS as virtual machines in Azure. So it's a two ways. Either we create a site-to-site VPN between your Azure and your on-prem, or the other way is you create a replica domain controller. You mean you're creating a similar same structure in the Azure VM. So these approaches can entail additional cost and administrative effort, because you need to manage to so the first option, you have to manage a site-to-site VPN and you have to maintain the connection bridging. The second option is you have to maintain a replica infrastructure in the Azure VM. So additionally, the difference between these two approaches is that the first option, authentication traffic will cross the VPN, while in the second option, replica traffic will cross the VPN and authentication traffic stays in the cloud. So Microsoft provides Microsoft Entra Domain Services as an alternative to these approaches. So instead of having this crossover of your authentication traffic, the Microsoft provides Microsoft Entra Domain Services as an alternative option. So this service, which runs as a part of Microsoft Entra ID P1 and P2 tier, provides domain services such as group policy, domain joining, Kerberos authentication to your Microsoft Entra tenant. So in my previous video we have seen these are like the major differences between the Entra ID and ADDS. So group policy management, domain joining, this Kerberos authentication, all these things are primarily used in ADDS only, not in the Entra. So these are provided as an additional domain services in Microsoft Entra ID P1 and P2 tier, so that you can utilize them to for especially for the line of business applications. So these services are fully compatible with locally deployed ADDS, so you can use them without deploying and managing additional domain controllers in the cloud. So here you can see the pictorial representation of that. So you have this Azure AD, that's the Entra ID. Then here Azure AD Domain Services, ADDS. Then here you have your virtual network or apps in the IS virtual network. So managed domain available in Contours VNets. So this is how the connection is managed. So as we said here, you have your Microsoft Entra Domain Services. So you have Azure AD, which has like a bridging or a man in a middle structure of domain service, Azure AD domain services, which will connect to your, which will help with the authentication, all the authentication and services for your virtual network. So because the Entra ID can integrate with your local ADDS, when you implement Microsoft Entra Connect, users can utilize organizational credentials in both on-premises ADDS and in Microsoft Entra Domain Services. Even if you don't have ADDS deployed locally, you can choose to use Microsoft Entra Domain Services as a cloud-only service. So meaning, if you don't have ADDS deployed locally, like on-prem, you don't have an on-prem AD, but still you can choose to use Microsoft Entra Domain Services as a cloud-only services. So this enables you to have similar functionality of a locally deployed ADDS without having a deploy a single domain controller on premises on in the cloud. For example, an organization can choose to create a Microsoft Entra tenant and enable Microsoft Entra Domain Services and then deploy a virtual network between its on-premises resources and Microsoft Entra tenant. So you can enable Microsoft Entra Domain Services for this virtual network so that all on-prem users and services can use domain services from Microsoft Entra ID. So Microsoft Entra Domain Services provides several benefits for organizations, such as administration, no need to manage, update and monitor domain controllers. So usually when we have our own domain controller for the ADDS, which has to be managed by our own internal team or by our vendor team, by the organization, is the responsibility of the organization. But when you are going to use the Entra Domain Services, you're going to have the similar functionality. You'll be utilizing similar functionality, but administration no need to manage it because it's in the cloud. It's a service provided. That's the thing. Administration don't need to deploy and manage Active Directory replications. There's no need to have domain admin or enterprise admin group for domains that Microsoft Entra ID manages. If you choose to implement Microsoft Entra Domain Services, you need to be aware of the services current limitations. So these also have certain limitations. It cannot exactly work as our on-prem ADDS. So what are the differences? Only base computer Active Directory object is supported. It's not possible to extend the schema for the Microsoft Entra Domain Services domain. The OU structure is flat and nested OUs aren't currently supported as we have in our normal AD. The built-in GPU and it exists for computer and user accounts. There's a built-in GPU and it exists for computers and user accounts. So it's not possible to target OUs with built-in GPUs. Additionally, you can't use Windows management instrumentation filters or security group filtering. So these are some of the limitations we have with Microsoft Entra Domain Services. By using Microsoft Entra Domain Services, you can freely migrate applications that use LDAP, NTLM and Kerberos protocols from your on-premises infrastructure to the cloud. Because initially this was a limitation, because if you want to move an application that's using Kerberos protocol for authentication to your cloud, will not be able to. You have to either keep it in the on-prem, or you have to change the authentication protocols because it's not been a primary authentication protocol in your cloud. So by using this domain services and Microsoft Entra Domain Services, you can just migrate all your applications that are still using your on-prem protocols or on-prem available services to your cloud. You can also use applications such as Microsoft SQL Server or Microsoft SharePoint Server on VMs, or deploy them in the Azure IaaS without needing domain controller in the cloud or VPN to local infrastructure. Without the two options what we have discussed in the previous slide, without those two options, you can still use the applications such as SQL Server and SharePoint Server on VMs without those two options. You can enable a Microsoft Entra Domain Services by using the Azure portal. This service charges per hour based on the size of your directory. Just the thing is, it will be adding an additional cost for your budget.